The views expressed on the Nova Society are those of the panelists and guests and do not necessarily reflect the views or opinions of the Phoenix Research Institute or any institution which any panel member is associated. Welcome back to the Nova Society, a space where dialogue deepens understanding and civic responsibility comes to life. I'm Dr. Mark Bound, joined by our regular panel, Dr. Scott Gershwer and Dr. Brooklyn Ann Weldon. Together, we'll unpack the stories that matter most, exploring the headlines, the history, and the big ideas shaping today's conversations. Let's dive in and hear what the panel has for us today.
So Frank from Virginia writes, I want to start by saying I have a great deal of respect for everyone on the Nova Society panel. The range of perspectives you all bring creates thoughtful discussion, and I've learned a lot from listening. What follows isn't meant as a criticism, just an invitation to dig a little deeper into an issue that's been on my mind. I've heard from both Mark and Scott saying the Department of Homeland Security shouldn't exist, and I've also heard the broader call from others to defund DHS. That phrase in particular is where I struggle. DHS is often treated as being synonymous with ICE or CBP, but those are just two components of a much larger department. DHS also includes the Coast Guard, FEMA, CISA, TSA, FLETC, the Office of Inspector General, USCIS, and the Secret Service. Each of those agencies deserves very different missions, and while it's completely fair to debate the merits of any one of them, a blanket call to defund DHS risks unintended consequences for agencies that many people would consider essential. If DHS funding were cut dramatically, it seems plausible that ICE and CBP would retain much of their funding, oh yes, while other less politically visible but highly functional agencies absorb their losses. FEMA already struggles to meet the growing demand for disaster relief, and CISA, though less well known, plays a crucial role in protecting critical infrastructure such as election systems, our power grids, our hospitals, and more from cyber threats. TSA funding cuts would directly affect everyday travelers. Even agencies that most people rarely think about provide services that quietly support national security and public safety in ways that are not questionable or offensive. Broad reductions could have ripple effects that reach far beyond immigration enforcement. I agree that DHS was created quickly and somewhat reactively after 9/11. There's a strong argument that some of its sub-agencies might function better housed elsewhere, but I don't have practical knowledge of how feasible it is to disentangle and transfer sub-agencies within the federal government or how likely that would be in the current political climate. My sense is that such restructuring would be complex, slow, and politically difficult. Given that DHS now exists as a collection of very different missions under one umbrella, I wonder whether more precise language would lead to better policy conversations. Instead of broad calls to defund DHS, perhaps it would be more constructive to focus specifically on ICE or CBP if those are the agencies at issue. And if major funding changes were ever pursued, they would ideally be carefully structured to avoid undermining agencies like FEMA or CISA while preserving others. I'd really appreciate hearing the panel's thoughts on this. If DHS were to be restructured or dismantled, what would that process realistically look like? How feasible is it to move or separate sub-agencies from DHS? And in the meantime, how should people think about reform that targets specific problems without weakening agencies that provide tangible benefits to the public? By the way, I'm definitely not asking for an actual prediction, nor whether any sub-agencies will ever be moved out from under DHS, as I'd like to see it actually happen. So I was not aware of all the different agencies under DHS, and I'm willing to bet that many of our listeners, as educated and as well aware of the issues as they are, may not be either, because so much happens underneath that we, the public, are not aware of. And as Frank has said, the administration is likely to cut those. And like FEMA, which is, Trump has said, oh, we don't need that. We don't need that. Well, yeah, we do. But ICE has already been elevated with a lot more money, while other things that are needed that people don't know about are likely being destroyed. And you can't just suddenly say, well, yeah, we need, 50 PhDs in this and a lot of information from peer-reviewed journals, because suddenly we've recognized that we need, this huge gap exists and we need all this stuff. Well, it's not going to be there. So, yeah, what do you think?
Well, first of all, let me just say, Frank in Virginia, T, as he's known to me, we've known each other for probably about 26 years. We miss seeing you in NORAD, T. Anyway, I don't think Scott and I have ever really said, I guess we have to be a little bit more clear on this. Dismantling DHS, the Department of Homeland Security, and yes, you're correct, it was created very quickly without an awful lot of thought. Not in any sense taking these agencies like FEMA and CISA and abandoning them, but instead I think it would strengthen them a little bit. It's a little bit more difficult to say, well, we don't need to give FEMA money, especially when you got a hurricane in South Carolina and North Carolina and Alabama and all these other places where you've got all that kind of going on, and say, well, we don't need to fund FEMA. Being under the umbrella of DHS, you're able to hide what you're not funding a little bit easier, in my mind. So if it's on its own, then okay, fine. Now, politically, you've got to answer the question as to why you're not funding FEMA and why American people who are subject to disasters, why they are not being taken care of by the federal government. Getting it out from under that umbrella of Department of Homeland Security, it brings it out into the light. And now your congressmen and your senators and the president and everybody else basically has to answer the question specifically about FEMA, where under this umbrella they can kind of hide it. It's like the show game. They can kind of hide it. The idea of DHS should be dismantled. I understand it was a knee-jerk reaction to an attack. I got that part. I got the part that these agencies never really coordinated together very well, but they didn't have to be put under one umbrella. That's a structural thing that could have been corrected by simply putting all these people in the same room and say, okay, guys, you guys got to start talking to each other a lot better and setting up the structure and the systems to allow that to happen. That's all that really was necessary before DHS came out. Ever since 9/11, somebody says national security and it's Pavlov's dog. Everybody, this agency, this Department of Homeland Security, yeah, you want to make it ICE and the Border Patrol? Fine. If that's what where you're gonna hang your hat, that's perfectly fine. But these other agencies, I think that if they're on their own, politically it becomes a little bit more of a minefield for those that want to defund them, because now you have to call them out specifically by name. And the money that goes to DHS, they can't shuffle around here, there, and everywhere else to their little pet projects. And like I say, I think that politically, it's probably poison to a lot of those that are resistant to funding some of these truly necessary agencies. For me, just the idea of the umbrella of Department of Homeland Security is the thing that needs to go away, and let these agencies stand on their own. They have for many, many years before 9/11. Let them stand on their own and let them be the battlegrounds for the Congress as when it comes to controlling the purse strings. Let it be. You want to talk about infrastructure? You're talking about CISA. When you're talking about disaster, you're talking about FEMA. Now your elected officials actually have to do some work. Who are you going to fund? Are you really worried about infrastructure? Then, well, okay. Critical infrastructure, CISA you got to give them some money. If you're worried about, a hurricane hitting, okay, fine. You got to think about FEMA. But the Department of Homeland Security basically made it smoke and mirrors so that it could be the pet projects. And it's only really become the pet projects in the last, I would say, 15 years. I mean, when Tom Ridge was first put in charge of it, not in my mind, not one of the great administrators in the world, but he didn't, go all out on, well, we're going to ICE and the Border Patrol. That didn't happen because that wasn't his thing. He was a governor. He was the governor of Pennsylvania. And so he thought more about FEMA and CISA and things like that. Now we've got the stormtroopers who all they think about is ICE and CBP, and that to me is where the issue is. Is Scott going to push back?
Not really. I mean, it's hard to disagree with anything you said. Neither one of us, I don't think, said anything about defunding them.
No.
What we said was that Homeland Security, which was initially an executive order by George W. Bush following 9/11 in 2002, became an act of Congress. I don't remember who sponsored it in 2002. I'm guessing it was probably a Democrat. I'm not really sure who, because it doesn't seem like something that Republicans would stand for usually. It adds another layer of bureaucracy over another bunch of, I think it's 22 different federal agencies that came under one umbrella for efficiency's sake. But that's not efficient. And we've seen time and time again. I mean, it didn't take very long for FEMA, for DHS to screw up FEMA and Hurricane Katrina is 2005, is 2 years later, was just an appalling response on the part of what's her name, Christian Nielsen, who later on became the head of DHS. I think it was during the first Trump administration, was responsible for a lot of the separation of children and so on and so forth. Had really cut her teeth as the woman who was in charge of the Katrina response for FEMA, and did an awful job of it. And these agencies are probably better off being smaller and more nimble and self-contained than underneath certainly somebody like Kristi Noem. But I think in general, it's not been a useful agency at all. So, I would get rid of DHS. Go back to having these 22 agencies or however many of them are left, run themselves, make sure that FEMA is well funded, that our cybersecurity is well funded and taken care of. And if you want to start defunding somebody, start with, first of all, putting the Border Patrol on the border instead of in cities. Get rid of ICE and replace it with INS again, which had a mission to, deport people who were found to be here illegally after due process, and not standing on street corners watching people as they walk by. And if their skin tone is too dark for the particular agent, he goes ahead and arrests them, in some cases throwing them on the ground and throwing them and hog tying them with strips and throwing them in the back of a van. However that ends up, that's a traumatic experience for somebody. And that's what this department has become. So yeah, defund ICE, but replace it with something that has the same mission that ICE had at the beginning before it was corrupted, and is no longer this massive army. Right? What would we say was the 17th largest army in the world, internally focused in the United States? We don't need that.
And like I say, let people, like the Coast Guard is in Department of Homeland Security. Why? It should always have been under the military. I mean, it makes zero sense that they would move the Coast Guard. And I'm sure that the admiral who was in charge of the Coast Guard knows more about what the Coast Guard should be doing and how they should be conducting their mission than a Kristi Noem, who only knows how to shoot puppies. I mean, I'm sorry. It's just the way it is. FEMA, I'm sorry, but there's people there that are in disaster, that have worked in disaster relief their entire careers, that know more about how to conduct this and how to integrate and how to cooperate with the National Guards and things like that. Homeland Security just basically puts another layer on there, incompetence and inexpertise, that the people that are experts basically have to fight.
I believe we're still blowing up boats, by the way, outside Venezuela. I believe we've killed another 110 people.
But that's not the Coast Guard.
No, I understand that. I wanted to ask what would have to happen for ICE to return to INS, for example, to go back to the status quo ante prior to 9/11. We need a Democratic president. We need a Democratic Congress. What has to happen to reverse the changes of 9/11 and the DHS creation?
I mean, it's gone through several different Democratic and Republican regimes, and has survived and gotten more powerful. So reversing it is going to take probably an act of Congress signed by a president just to separate out these organizations, get them out from underneath the umbrella and have them working. The original idea of Homeland Security was to have somebody with oversight on the FBI, CIA, NSA. It became something completely different. Washington has managed to screw this up. Again, I'm not really blaming any one Republican or Democratic Party or president for this or Congress, but it was a bad idea to begin with. It's proven itself to be a bad idea, and it needs to be reversed somehow. I don't know what it would take exactly. It would certainly have to be legislated.
Absolutely.
Right, because they did an act of Congress to create it. It would be an act of Congress to remove it and to put these agencies under their own auspices again, with accountability to the President of the United States, not to a secretary who, is in today's world, a political hire, not somebody who's got proven competence in anything other than dressing up.
If you ever look at, like, during Hurricane Katrina, for as bad as it was handled, yes, the president went down there, but he's not directing anything. So let's not get the idea of, commander-in-chief directing anything. He's not directing the doggone thing. He's got people there on the ground that are supposed to know what the heck they're doing, and he's relying on them to do what they know they should be doing. And that's what it should be. But right now we've got, the cosplayer, Kristi Noem, who's going to put on whatever uniform she can and basically cosplay her way through this and present herself that she's got some sort of expertise. So I think, T, that the whole thing comes down to it is that we're not saying defund the Department of Homeland Security. We're saying eliminate the entire concept of what Homeland Security is. Get rid of that.
Right. And I want to be clear about one other thing, because when we had this conversation that brought this up, the history of the Border Patrol and now ICE from 2003 or 2002 on has been one of mass criminality, organizations that operate in the margins of our society, away from sight largely, massively corrupt, eminently bribable, violent. We hear stories of them shooting over the fence line that separates Mexico and the United States if they don't like the way the Mexicans are jeering at them from the other side. They have taken shots at them and shot people, in Mexican territory. The organization has become a disgrace that is roundly in need of reform and new leadership and a new credo and values and everything else.
I understand that a third American citizen was murdered over a year ago, and that murder was covered up. I'm not sure if that was ICE or Border Patrol. Gentleman might have been in Texas. I'm not sure, but he was killed, shot through the windshield of his car.
Right, which is like a tactic that they use. They step in front of the car. So now they could say, well, the car is a deadly weapon and I'm going to fire my weapon back. And that's exactly what we saw in Minneapolis. But apparently that's not anything unusual at the border. So, again, do we want to have this rogue agency funded under DHS, or do we want to have reforms of it that make it a less lethal, more accountable organization? I would say, yes, we do. I mean, if you want to be one of these macho types that says, kill them all, let God sort it out type of mentality, then I suppose you're going to do exactly what the Republicans right now are doing and funding it the way they are funding it and thinking about it the way they are thinking about it. Like anybody who sets foot in America who's not a U.S. citizen is fair game. Right. That they don't deserve due process, that the Constitution doesn't provide for due process for them, and that only citizens get that benefit. Well, that's not true. It's not constitutional, and we shouldn't be acting that way. And we have an agency that actually does that exact thing. and we need to do something about that.
And, again, T, you mentioned all the agencies that are under DHS, and I think there's actually a couple more, I'm really not sure, that are in there. Think about how massive this is. How can one person, the Secretary of Homeland Security, manage all of that? Even if there was a competent person in the office, how can that be possible? And again, when you've got all of these agencies that are, vying for funding, and they all have really specific things that they do, can you say it's all for national security? Sure, I guess you can make the argument, but the bottom line is that FEMA, national security. Explain that one to me. I'm sure that there's people out there that'll make the argument, oh, FEMA's got this to do with it and that. All right, whatever. But the fact is that this is such a massive agency. One person, and as I say, even the most competent of administrators, of which our current Secretary of the DHS is not, would struggle to be able to fairly manage all of these important agencies together. So, to your question, what would this really realistically look like? Yes, Congress would have to create a law to be able to get rid of DHS, basically returning all these agencies back to sub-agencies within the government. You know what your problems were at 9/11, what you want to have fixed. Okay, fix it without having to create this monstrosity, without creating an agency that, depending on who the person is that's in the secretary of it, its priorities are based upon that person's whims, which is exactly what we're looking at right today. Right now, Kristi Noem is Border Patrol and ICE. You don't hear her talking too much about FEMA or the Coast Guard or any of the rest of them. So it's her little, it becomes a fiefdom. I'm almost a government within the government, where it's her whims. Now, granted, she's taken her marching orders from Trump. Yep, no doubt about it. But these agencies have specific responsibilities, and they are well trained to be able to do the responsibilities they have. I agree with Scott. Send the Border Patrol back to the border, right where they belong. That's why you're called the Border Patrol. Send you back to the border, and ICE completely revamp that entire mess that has become. Reduce it down and put some of that money into FEMA and these other agencies.
Yeah, I was thinking about what you were saying about a competent administrator would not be able to handle all this, and thinking about Kristi Noem, who's busy, as you say, cosplaying. If she were actually attempting any type of administrative duties, she wouldn't have time to dress up and dance around and be on television. She'd be running from one meeting to another, attempting to learn what's going on in each of these agencies in her portfolio. She has no idea what's going on in any of these because she's too busy being a front person and in front of the TV and cameras. And as I understand it, actually, Corey Lewandowski is the one running everything, and she's just a front person. And apparently Corey Lewandowski is married, and she and he are having an affair. That's my understanding. I don't know how true any of that is, but he is the Trump person who's been around for a very long time and is the one who actually is giving the orders from Trump that Noam simply carries out because she is attractive to look at. And of course, for Trump, all this is like reality TV, and everybody has to look good. Who's going to be in front of a camera has to look good in front of a camera.
Well, yeah. And, the bottom line is that the Corey Lewandowski thing, again, it's kind of a distraction. Are they or aren't they? I don't really care. It really doesn't matter. But the fact that, like, an organization like FEMA should not be just a political hack. The person that's in charge of the Coast Guard should not be a political hack. The person in charge of the Office of the Inspector General should not be a political hack. And basically putting them under one umbrella of DHS has made them all responsible for talking to a political hack. is what they're basically doing. Same thing, we could argue that the Department of Justice should not be a political hack. That's one of the ways that we get it wrong and the British get it right. He's not appointed. I mean, and he does not report to the Prime Minister in Great Britain, the Attorney General. So there's a few things that we could probably change with that. But just staying with DHS, I mean, these agencies have carried out their function for many, many years. These are not new agencies. They aren't like brand new. And they've done their job very well in the past. FEMA has done a great job. And I'll stick with FEMA because, as somebody that was a paramedic, I work with them quite a bit. They do their job. They're efficient. They are truly efficient. And FEMA does not have in the past, does not have a political reason for doing what they're doing. They come into the communities and they say, hey, they say those very scary words. I'm from the government and I'm here to help. But you know what? This is that one time when you hear that, it's like, it's FEMA. They are, because they're coming with money. They've got resources that maybe local communities don't. And that's the way it's supposed to work, as opposed to having, again, cosplay Barbie running around and making like she knows what the hell that she's doing. Is it going to be easy, T? Nope. Not at all, because you're going to have to get the Congress to agree to it. The president's going to have to sign off to it. You probably won't see it during this presidency. So that probably isn't going to happen because the Republicans are so enamored by the current mission of what they see as Homeland Security, which is focused on those two different agencies. And so it's going to be extremely difficult to get that. I think that you change the president, get a Democratic Congress in there, and I think you're probably going to be able to see that this could be changed. Would it weaken him? I think it would strengthen him. Maybe in the short term, it'll weaken him a little bit. But as I say, right from the beginning, so I'm your congressman. And I say I don't want to fund FEMA. Okay, now I have to be responsible if your area gets hit by a hurricane. Why didn't you want to fund FEMA? And I'm held accountable for that. Now I say, well, DHS, we're just giving the money to DHS. And yeah, we try to tell them where to allocate it to, but, it's smoke and mirrors.
Well, the recent Potomac, there was a spill in the Potomac or a pipe burst in the Potomac. Did you hear about that?
I heard that it was Trump's diaper blew up, but okay.
Well, to my understanding, that the accident or the spill happened a month before Trump actually did anything, and the whole the situation was brought under control by Maryland and the local people, and then Trump said something about it. Oh, we have a big emergency, and we're going to have FEMA do this and do that. But I mean, by the time Trump actually announced anything, the situation was contained, and the whole thing is extremely bizarre. And the fact that the local people and local government were already taking care of it, and people in the and people across the country already knew about it before Trump even made an announcement. I mean, what does that suggest to you as far as competence in DHS and the president and whatnot, and what Frank or T has been asking here? I mean, given the risks of like E. coli and other contaminants in something like this.
Yeah. There's going to be long-lasting ramifications from that spill. I don't think there's any doubt about it. Look, again, to make this too political is, I think, a mistake. This Department of Homeland Security was a mistake from the get-go, and by now we should understand that well enough that we don't have to think about it too much. The worst grades on employee morale, people who are dissatisfied with senior leadership, which is almost always, it doesn't matter who's in control and not competent. The TSA has been a disaster from the start, right? TSA was another overreaction to 9/11, and the TSA was the job of the TSA was handled by the airports and by private security firms. Probably could go back to that and they would do a better job than the government does. I know that they slipped up on 9/11. I know that these guys were allowed to board the planes with box cutters and so on, and take everybody by surprise. I don't think that that'll ever happen again, because I think that people are more aware of those risks to the world. 80% of Europe's commercial airports use private firms. Canada, 100%, I believe, at all major airports is private companies doing the screening. They would probably do a better job than having a political hack at the top of this organization. And again, you can go down one organization after another. FEMA has had its problems, no doubt about it. Congress, there was a movement in Congress, mostly among Republicans, where they didn't want to give money to places that had suffered a disaster because of the corruption that has happened in the past. And there's no doubt about the fact that there has been massive amounts of fraud. Katrina was one of the most fraudulent episodes in American history. You can go even further back. Hurricane Andrew, the response to that was largely criticized. So the problem here is political hacks getting jobs that they're not capable of performing, and then people and defunding, and then people going, well, it doesn't work. We should get rid of it. We shouldn't get rid of it. Just make it non-political and get it out of the Department of Homeland Security might be one way to do that. I don't know really what else to say about it. There's a lot of bureaucracy here that people who hate bureaucracy seem to be supporting, because they're terrified that if it goes away, things will get worse. Well, I hardly see how things are going to get much worse. I think that there are better solutions for these problems than the ones that are being given by these politicians, and that a better solution is available. That's all the bottom line.
Yep.
Sorry, Frank.
No. I mean, again, I totally agree. It's and hopefully we've answered the question, T.
And by the way, for those of you who think this is partisan of me, I mean, I think Mayorkas did a horrible job as the head of Homeland Security. Refusing to answer questions that were good questions asked of him. The policies at the border were probably too lax at a time when more stringent requirements were needed.
Yep.
So it can go both ways. There's no, once again, it comes back down to putting political people in charge of something that really needs to be run by experts, and the experts aren't there anymore. We're seeing it, by the way, with HHS also, right? Where political people are making decisions about public health rather than public health officials.
Yep. It is a matter of being partisan. It is a matter of saying, I think that Pam Bondi is probably the worst attorney general that we have ever had, at least in my lifetime. I know she is. But I will say this, Merrick Garland wasn't all that good. I mean, he was way too cautious about things. He was the, don't rock the boat thing. And I don't know if that was something that was put into his head by Biden, but he was always, to me, even when he was put up to be on the Supreme Court, it was always the soft-spoken, the guy in the back of the room. He was the thinker. And I don't think he did a very good job. I think there's a lot of things they could have done. Holder made mistakes. I mean, they all make mistakes. But the fact, and we should rightfully criticize, whether it's Republican or Democrat, rightfully criticize them for that. Joe Biden made mistakes. Barack Obama made mistakes. They all make mistakes because they're human. But I will say this, I was watching, and we'll be talking about this in the next episode. I was watching a little bit of the State of the Union last night, and I have to say, I had a pang. I missed Bush 2. I don't know why, but I missed Bush 2 for some reason. So, hey, It is what it is, and like T, hopefully we've answered your question. Hopefully maybe we'll see you in NORAD again, because Linda and I are both there. There you got it. And that's all the time we have for today's episode. The Nova Society is a production of Nova Society Media, a division of the Phoenix Research Institute. We want to thank our production partners, Buzzsprout, who hosts the Nova Society, Audacity, our editing team, Apple Podcasts, the largest source of podcast and music online, Spotify, the most popular platform for the Nova Society, and iHeartRadio, your destination for all things music and podcasting. The Nova Society is available on all of these and other quality platforms listed in our description. And most importantly, we want to thank you, our listeners. Without your support, the Nova Society could not be possible. If you haven't already, please consider subscribing on the platform of your choice. It's easy, it's free, and helps our channel grow. For questions or comments, you can reach us at nova.society.podcast@gmail.com. So on behalf of Dr. Brooklyn Ann Weldon, Dr. Scott Gershworth, and all of our production partners here at the Nova Society, I'm Dr. Mark Bound. Remember, the true power of society is knowledge. Thank you for listening, and we hope to see you again next time.
Hi, everyone. This is JJ, the co-founder of Good Pods. If you haven't heard of it yet, Good Pods is like Goodreads or Instagram, but for podcasts. It's new, it's social, it's different, and it's growing really fast. There are more than 2 million podcasts, and we know that it is impossible to figure out what to listen to. On Good Pods, you follow your friends and podcasters to see what they like. That is the #1 way to discover new shows and episodes. You can find Good Pods on the web or download the app. Happy listening!